even when these senior White House officials go out, even up to the level of Mr. Rubio, we don't know. We just don't know whether they're speaking on behalf of Mr. Trump. This is a man who takes policy advice from people who have been dismissed as complete wackos. The other thing we've noticed is a pattern from Trump 1.0 is that his policy changes can happen not only by the day, but by the hour. It often depends on who and what whispered into his ear just a few seconds ago. It may, if I can note as well, that he is desperate. This is a desperate man for a foreign policy when he hasn't had any so far, especially in the main theaters of conflict of Ukraine and Gaza. In fact, both theaters of war are escalating, getting worse, not better. So it goes to show the limits of the White House Trump foreign policy.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're talking to Michael Bociurkiw, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, a former spokesman for the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He's also an author and journalist speaking on many international media outlets. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you again, sir.
I feel we should start by asking how you are and what the situation is where you are. You're joining us from Odessa today, which has been reportedly faced Russian strikes or the threat of overnight. What is the situation like there?
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It's I've been outside for quite some time today, and people are going about their normal business. It's Holy Thursday here, so lots of preparations for the Easter festivities coming up, especially on Saturday and Sunday. We did receive quite a few air raid alerts overnight and into today, but it was really Kherson to the east of us that took really, really bad hits, and as well as Dnipro. In Dnipro, DTEC, the private energy provider here in Ukraine, has reported pretty major damage to its infrastructure. Of course, worth noting that there is meant to be a ceasefire deal between Ukraine and Russia, brokered by the Americans, which prohibits attacks on each other's energy infrastructure. That is simply not happening. So, as you can imagine, a lot of anxiety here, especially after those Palm Sunday strikes on Sumy, the double tap strike that killed dozens of people and injured well over 100. So as people gather, as they do here, both inside and outside the churches, especially on Saturday when they bless Easter baskets here, there's going to be, I'm sure, a lot of nervousness. And one more thing worth noting, this year is particularly unique in the sense that both the Catholic and the Orthodox calendars have merged. It happens from time to time. So Easter is being observed by all the faithful here in Ukraine, going to be huge numbers.
And I do want to dig into that a little bit with you, Michael, because that really does create a particular risk this weekend, because you will have a larger number than other Easters of people out in churches, out in public. That creates risk if there are airstrikes, which they're increasingly likely to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it just struck me today, looking at that, religious church calendar, that, Palm Sunday, or as it's called here, Verna Nedelya, was also observed in Russia. And it was President Putin, who loves to be photographed crossing himself in the Orthodox Church in Russia, who ordered those strikes on Sumy. So it does go to remind everyone, as if they're not aware, but it reminds everyone of the degree of inhumanity on the Russian side, that even the holiest, most profound date on the church calendar is not off bounds for Russian war crimes to be committed here. They know darn well that there'll be millions of people, congregating at churches and outside, again, especially on Saturday, when is the traditional blessing of the Easter baskets. That really beautiful tradition also goes into Sunday. And, these are places, it's got to be pointed out as well, that don't really have bomb shelters. So lots of exposure there. But, having said that, I think I can accurately say that Ukrainians have, in a way, normalized or internalized this war. They will not let it interrupt the most important holiday on the church calendar to them. And one last thing, so just so people know, it isn't only the resurrection that is being celebrated and observed here. It's also the kind of pagan traditions of spring and rebirth. So an extra special holiday after a long and brutal winter.
And Russia has seemingly ramped up its air campaign since the start of the year. Uh, this has to be a pretty clear sign of Putin's feeling towards any sort of ceasefire or ending the war.
Yeah, and it baffles me that it has not gone through the thick head of Donald Trump, who we can remind people promised a peace deal within one day of taking office, that it hasn't got into his thick head that Mr. Putin is actually disrespectful of him in terms of the way he's waging this war. He's showing no signs of putting the arms down. In fact, recent analysts and reputable institutions have said that Russia is actually ramping up its drone production, apparently now with the help of the Chinese, ramping up production of armored vehicles, of missiles, and as you know, also are reaching far beyond Russia's borders to North Korea and now China to get new recruits. There was an interesting figure just a week ago or two ago by U.S. General Christopher Cavoli, and he said that the Russian Federation is on track to produce 250,000 artillery shells a month. That is three times the combined output of the U.S. and Europe, and also tanks and armored vehicles as well. So while Ukraine is struggling to keep its tanks going that have been donated by Western allies, keep F-16s in the air, things like that, the Russians are just going full tilt in terms of restocking their supplies. And we'll see also if a spring offensive happens once the ground hardens it a bit more.
And elsewhere in Europe, Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio are in France, I think as we speak, meeting Emmanuel Macron and other European partners of Ukraine. Obviously, that 100-day deadline that Trump set after the other one that he completely ignored,
right,
is looming. Do you have any confidence that we're any closer now to a ceasefire deal being agreed?
No, I don't. In fact, I have less confidence by the day. And the reason for that is Mr. Trump, who I've gone to calling the contortionist in chief, because his policy twists are, more than you'll see in a regular yoga class. And the other thing that's come out this week from a lot of observers in the United States is that even when these senior White House officials go out, even up to the level of Mr. Rubio, we don't know. We just don't know whether they're speaking on behalf of Mr. Trump. This is a man who takes policy advice from people who have been dismissed as complete wackos, to the point where one of them, I don't need to mention her name, her advice led to the firing of senior national security officials. And the other thing we've noticed is a pattern from Trump 1.0 is that his policy changes can happen not only by the day, but by the hour. It often depends on who and what whispered into his ear just a few seconds ago. It may, if I can note as well, that he is desperate. This is a desperate man for a foreign policy when he hasn't had any so far, especially in the main theaters of conflict of Ukraine and Gaza. In fact, both theaters of war are escalating, getting worse, not better. So it goes to show the limits of the White House Trump foreign policy.
And talking about that, I suppose unpredictability, you could characterize it as, presumably there are going to be some discussions, or it will be mentioned while these discussions are going on in Europe, about Trump's language on Zelensky, saying earlier this week that it was Zelensky that somehow started the war against his larger neighbor. I mean, what did you make of those comments?
Well, I think there's one thing we can give Mr. Trump credit for, and that is consistency. Consistency in terms of attacking those who disagree with him. And the reason I raised this was because on the CBS 60 Minutes that Mr. Zelensky made the comments that, number one, the war is going to get worse. It could develop into World War III. And also he, in that same interview, invited Mr. Trump to Ukraine And how does Mr. Trump respond? Not only by criticizing Mr. Zelensky, but also by attacking 60 Minutes and threatening them with legal or administrative action, calling them fake news. So it's difficult to take anything that comes out of that White House seriously. And the other kind of baffling thing here I have is, why hasn't the Zelensky administration moved on from Mr. Trump, in the sense that they're not a credible party, they can't be trusted. I don't think Mr. Trump likes Mr. Zelensky, he doesn't like Ukraine. So in that case, why not look at another interlocutor to bring us closer to peace, whether it's Turkey, uh, any of the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE. These are all leaders in those countries that I've mentioned who have Mr. Putin on speed dial and can deal with him. China, I should mention, is the only one who could probably phone Mr. Putin and say, okay, end the war today. But they have a different set of concerns at the moment, the Trump trade war, but also different priorities as well. Not so sure they're as neutral as they say.
But how much power would one of those countries have to get a ceasefire in place, or some sort of de-escalation of this conflict? I mean, we've had other sort of pseudo ceasefires that were kind of agreed, and yet, as you say, in recent days, energy infrastructure has been attacked in Dnipro. Russia's still launching attacks, not from the Black Sea, but over it. Is there any, or was there ever any trust on which to build a ceasefire?
It ebbs and flows with many interlocutors, and indeed, Turkey and Saudi Arabia have played a big role, either earlier on in the war or recently, to try and bring us closer to peace. But there is a couple of things that these countries have, and that is they buy a lot of arms from Russia, especially in the case of Turkey. And also, in terms of the Gulf states, they have oil and other points of leverage that they could use. Again, with the United States, when you look at their behavior as well towards Ukraine, why I'm underlining my point, they should look elsewhere for an interlocutor, is Mr. Trump also slapped them with tariffs, not at the high end, more at the lower end. Ukraine, along with Moldova, this is a country at war with a $3.5 billion a month budget deficit. It's in no position to be able to suffer from his ridiculous trade war. So for those reasons, I'm thinking that they should really look at other countries to try and bring us closer to peace, because it doesn't seem to be going anywhere with Mr. Trump and his team.
And I also want to ask you, speaking about these other countries that have been involved in this conflict, what you made of these Chinese nationals that have been found fighting in Ukraine?
As newspaper editors in the UK like to say, what a cracker of a story. The figures initially looked quite small, that we could almost write it off, but not anymore. According to reputable sources that include Reuters and the Institute for the Study of War, the numbers are relatively large. I mean, one figure I saw was above the 150 that Mr. Zelensky said. It goes up to 170, 180, let's say almost 200. Now, what is very interesting here is that these men who have been found in fighting on the Russian side signed up on their own free will, apparently, and there are others in the pipeline. And it is hard to believe. I mean, I've covered China a lot. I know how controlled it is there, social media, the media itself, how controlled they are. Nothing goes unnoticed. Lots more, among the most intense surveillance of any country in the world. Hard to believe that Chinese officials don't know about this. And if they do, why are they doing something about it? Because China likes to project itself as a neutral party in all of this. One quick factoid, if I can, to kind of describe the relationship between China and Ukraine is pre-war, Mr. Zelensky referred to China as its most important economic trading partner. But it was also during COVID, which China pretty much blackmailed Ukraine and Mr. Zelensky and said, if you don't stop criticizing our human rights record in minorities, the Uyghurs, for example, we're going to stall the delivery of 500,000 doses of COVID vaccine. This is the way they transact business. Again, and sorry, one more thing, and I think Mr. Zelensky has become a little bit more critical of China in recent days, which is new as well. So it's a complicated relationship, but China can't claim that it doesn't have a role in this war. And on top of that, documented evidence that it is providing drone and dual use technology to the Russians.
And of course, there's also the issue of the North Korean troops that have been
Yes.
fighting in Kursk. Ukraine's warning that those troops could now be redeployed into Ukraine itself. How much of a worry is that?
Not that much of a worry, because these are men who have no modern battlefield experience. As you know, this war and wars to follow are relying more on technology, things that fly in the air mostly, than actually men or tanks on the ground. And they have not been faring well. A lot of them have either been captured or killed. However, North Korea has been benefiting immensely from this war in terms of selling lots and lots of ammunition to Russia. The payments going back to Pyongyang are pretty darn large. I suspect they're also getting oil, and what a circus, right? Russia also happens to operate a huge fleet of so-called ghost ships or shuttle ships that can travel major waterways without detection and deliver these types of goods to their friends and allies around the world.
And what does all of that say about Russia's increasing attempt to bring nations from the global south on side as well? I mean, you've just returned from Thailand, where you were looking at how this happens, how it's happening around the world as well. What can you tell us?
Well, I'm going to tell you something really profound and important, if I may, and that's from not only covering Asia extensively, as part of Asia Times, South China Morning Post, but having recently returned from there, is that I don't know how a country, for example, like Thailand, which also very reliable documented evidence that it's shipping, it's a transit point for dual use technology, and also very crucially, commercial aviation parts to Russia. We're talking to the tune last year of around $100 million. That's a huge increase over the previous year. And if you go to Thailand, parts of it like Phuket look like a Russian colony. The amount of tourism, 1.4 million last year. Russians get a 3-month visa, or they can get a 1-year visa on professional grounds. They can exchange their currency frequently. But it's really what's bothersome with both Thailand and the UAE that they've become hubs. They've become either hubs for shipment of sanctioned items, or they've become havens for oligarchs and other Russians to park their super yachts to buy luxury property there. The Russians are the biggest purchasers of luxury property in the UAE. But, you know, I've interviewed a former prime minister of Thailand, and I've always had a lot of respect for their kind of posture, foreign policy posture, their presence in Asia, their negotiating skills. And I would encourage the Prime Minister of Thailand to look herself in the mirror and say, how will I be judged a few years from now as party to this conflict, which has killed millions of people, displaced millions? Um, when I talk about millions, I'm talking about also, civilians as well as people in the military, but also it's the big displacement and the injuries and all the suffering that is going on. I don't know if that's a face of Thailand that should be projected to the world. I know that's a harsh thing to say. I might get into trouble about it, but I think it's an important one to put forward.
And is that trade enough for Putin, though? I mean, especially if the oil price keeps dropping, which it looks like it will, thanks in part to Donald Trump. Uh, could that cause a lot of trouble for Putin's economy?
Well, not if you have such a good friend in the White House, because there's now talk of sanctions being lifted on everything from Russian flights to the United States to crucial things like fertilizer, agricultural products. Russia has made it clear it's desperate to get more of those out there. Um, but, I think the EU leaders might also want to take a look at themselves in the mirror as well, because Russian fertilizer continues to flow into European countries. And as Ukrainska Pravda and others have documented, there are Russian owned steel factories. There's one or two, yeah, there's two big ones operating nearby Brussels, where the EU and where NATO are based. Isn't that lovely for them to be able to say to the Ukrainians, you have no better friend, we will be with you for the long term, and yet they allow this to happen right under their noses. It's really a shameful situation.
Is there still time now then for Europe at least to tighten up those sanctions, and can they still hold the pressure on Russia's economy?
It is really important. One of the big things we sometimes forget about it, amidst, the rare earth mineral deals and things like that, is there's something like $350 billion of frozen Russian sovereign wealth, mostly in Europe. The Europeans have finally got to the point where they will take interest earned from that money and use it for the Ukraine war or give it to the Ukrainians. But I think they should go a step further and actually start digging away at the principle, especially given the debt that Ukraine has. I know the European Central Bank officials are going to say, oh, well, that's going to really put a lot of doubt into the strength of the euro. Well, so what? Let it be, because, me and others have been saying for a long time, hey, boys and girls, it's time to get on a war footing. It's time to turn your economies, at least temporarily, onto a war footing. Why? Because if you don't, Mr. Putin his friends will not only be setting up steel factories on your own territory, they will be there with tanks and other military equipment. And in fact, in the past few days, Mr. Putin, or his officials rather, have said, we have not ruled out, making some kind of attack on a NATO country, but it'd probably start with the Baltic states. But, that hybrid war they're waging, whether it's disinformation or cutting of submarine cables or trying to smuggle bombs onto Western commercial cargo aircraft, neutralizing opponents on foreign soil, whether it be Spain or the UK, that continues to go on. Wake up, brothers and sisters.
And just finally, Michael, who is it now then? I mean, I think we've discussed a lot here about how unreliable perhaps America has now become for Ukraine as a key ally. Who is it that Ukraine should now turn to and petition, as it were, to keep crucial military supplies going and also that diplomatic support on the world stage?
Yeah, well, I think this involves not alienating the Trump administration too much, and of course that's not an easy thing to do, as everyone from Keir Starmer to Mark Carney to Emmanuel Macron have found out. A lot of Asian leaders are finding out now too. So that relationship has to be handled very carefully. But I think for the time being, it does look like U.S. military aid and air defense system will remain operative, intelligence sharing. And of course, that's going to be very important for the coming days when Easter is celebrated and you need those air defense systems to happen. Now, the Europeans, despite my criticism of them, they are huddling. They are talking about getting more money to Ukraine, more military aid. Even Germany is looking at some pretty big things and keeping the money flowing. But as all of us know, they're way behind in terms of their own defense spending. So it's not like overnight you can say, okay, we're going to send a lot of kit to Ukraine. But, and the other thing, let's see if it happens. President Zelensky has suggested a kind of pan-European force that is different than NATO, that also includes Ukraine. I think, friendly nations to Ukraine should also look at really, really helping it ramp up more of its drone technology. It's doing a fantastic job. Also getting those long-range missiles, more of them, into Ukrainian hands so they can strike at legitimate military targets deep inside Russia from where all these drones and missiles are coming from.
Well, Michael Bociurkiw, thank you very much for joining us today on Frontline.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news and analysis, or read it on thetimes.com. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.